Hey everybody, this is On coming to you with this month's video and here we are another month getting ready to head into July. I feel like this year is just flying by on everything. And this month we have a big focus around needing to finish what we've started and also preparing for transformation. And these are really kind of going to be the big focuses in our world. For those who don't know, I am the author of this book, The Code Journey. You can pick up a copy of that if you want on my website. It's at compassioncodes.com. You'll see the tab for books, the code journey, and all of that good stuff on there. And you can check out more about what the work is about and what I do. And in this particular video, I'm addressing the world issues because I do have a group of people who like to pay attention to how are the energetics playing out in connection to what's happening in our world. What types of things might we see? What types of things are going on? And I don't work with any intel. You can see I'm a very small channel. So if you like what I present here, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out. I appreciate all the help I can get. But I just have people that like to stay up on it. So I do create this video for them and to kind of give us an idea of a heads up. What types of things might we expect to see based on the energy that is going to be present? So I've got this kind of huge background that I work from, and the work I do integrates over 50 different modalities. But again, I don't work with any of the intel groups. I don't work with any of the so-called truther communities. I'm not in any of those networks. I'm just on my own. I'm just on my own, doing my own thing. And, if you like that, great. If you don't, well, then, there's plenty of other people out there. What can I say? I'm going to just be doing the work as long as I can do the work. And I'm actually getting ready to release the 2027 version of that book. Coming out, I've made some changes on it, so I think it will be a little more user friendly to people. I'm excited about that. I plan to release it around the middle of August, which is usually when I release the upcoming year's edition. And it will be the 10th year I put this book out. So I'm pretty excited that I actually hit a 10-year milestone. I feel like that's a big achievement. No matter how everything goes, I feel like just that alone is a big achievement. So I'm going to hold with that. So this month we're looking at these concepts of we got to finish what we've started and we're preparing for transformation. This is going to be big as we look at what's going down in July. So, to start with, what we're going to look at is the overview of the month. What are our monthly influences? And the monthly influences are bringing up a lot of things. And this is also part of the times, our bigger influences. These are kind of, some of these things feel like ongoing patterns, and they are because they are bigger patterns. They're attached to bigger energy currents, ones that last a long time. So we do see some of these recurring kind of from month to month in a way. But throughout the whole month, we're going to see things connected to addictions. We're going to see this recommitting to God, divine source. And I always tell people, there's a couple of things that come up with that. That means we could see more coming out in the news cycles that are around addictions, drug dealing, drugs coming in, how they're being funneled, how they're being channeled, more coming out, like even in foods, the things that have been put in our foods to create addictions, to keep us eating unhealthy or to crave things or to go down these different paths, or even our addiction to vanity, right? Look at all the people that take things like Ozempic, and even our vitamins. I mean, a lot of our vitamin companies are not like individually owned people who are healthy mindset. They're connected in with the pharmaceutical companies. They've been bought up. You even look at some of the stores like Whole Foods, owned by Amazon, things like this. So you, these addictions can come up in so many different forms, and sexual addictions. So we can continue to see any of the things that are connected to the sexual perversions and sexual addictions. So it could be a whole wide range of things when we look at addictions that can be coming out. And we're also going to see this whole movement towards recommitting to God and divine source. And so you've got this variation. But when you see these people, and I've seen it and I've called it out because they're in the spiritual communities, the truther communities, and I'm going to continue to call it out. There's a lot of fake people out there who just want views, who just realize, hey, the trend now is everybody get baptized, everybody go back to God, all of this stuff. And they're fake. They're doing, movie style baptisms in front of you. Again, a lot of them are fake, and you got to watch for that because a lot of these people are doing it just to keep their viewers. If they didn't do it, they wouldn't have their viewers. And you have to watch these people who change things for based on whatever the trend is are not necessarily there because that's where their heart is. And some of these people are very convincing and very real. And you got to realize the paid influencers out there come in every shape, size, and form. And they do have network connections. And it is, so many people are tied into these big networks of people out there believing these are the intel people, these are the ones giving the truth, and most of them aren't. I'm sorry, but they're just not. So you've got to go towards yourself with these things. But we're going to see this, and some people are going to be sincere. There's going to be more and more people, like for example, those people who are giving up addictions are going to probably recommit themselves to some path of God, divine source in there. So we got to kind of look at that. And then, that can also bring out variations of things happening in the news cycles around religious people. We really have to watch the choices that are being made because the choices that are being made, particularly by our world leaders, can either bring blessings or create harm. And it all depends on what side of the fence they're sitting on. It all depends on whether they're aligned with God or divine source or not. And there are going to be sacrifices that are going to be needed for true happiness. And a lot of people don't want to look at this. They just want to have the big white Lord, whatever, come in and rescue them and give them, their happiness, which unfortunately a lot of people think their happiness is residing in some big financial windfall. And that's not where our happiness resides. Our happiness is not in that. Money gives us the ability to do things, but it is not the source of happiness and will never find happiness in it. So if you can't find happiness without the money, you're not going to find happiness because you get money. And this is a big thing. So we are going to see in July where there are going to have to be some sacrifices made, and people may not be happy about that. In order sometimes to get to the blessings, we have to give up the things that are not healthy, that are blocks, that are obstacles, that are addictions. And that means we have to give up some of our programming and we have to give up some of these ideas in our head and we have to face issues within us and collectively as a society. And yeah, sometimes that's a little bit of a bumpy ride to get through. But in the end, the sacrifices become well worth it. And what's so challenging, I think, these days is because so much of what's out there, it could be used for good or it could be used for bad. And it all depends on who's in control of it. And I think it's a scary thing because we want to move forward. We want to have these things, but there's other things that oftentimes go along with moving forward that we don't want to have. And I think we're walking a lot of tricky lines in this world. So I think that, we might have to just take some deep breaths in this month and go, okay, this is something we're going to have to let go of, or we're going to have to be a little bit uncomfortable temporarily while we get through things and we're making the transitions that need to happen. We're going to have a real big look coming in at real value versus illusionary value. So this is going to be calling out a lot of narratives. It's going to call out probably a lot of agendas around environmental stuff, I would take a guess. It's probably going to call out a lot of stuff around um, what people have been placing value on over the last maybe couple of decades versus what is truly important to survival. And I think these are different things because we can say that pretty much anything has value in one way or another, and it does. And matter of fact, today I was just putting out a post like you can't be sitting on one end or the other of the spectrum. We got to kind of find a little bit of a balance here because neither end favors us. If you coddle everybody too much and you make everything too easy, you weaken them. If you are too hard on them and you have no compassion, then you lose a whole nother group, in there. There's got to be a balance. I think we can do both. I think that's where that sort of gentle strength resides, that resilience is. I think that we can be compassionate in the process of being firm and strong and doing things. But again, yeah, looking at, you know, what really holds true value. And so much of what people chase in this world is an illusionary value. Um, it's based in things, it's based in materialism, it's based in status, it's based in all kinds of things that actually mean nothing outside of this world, that actually mean nothing in the scope that goes beyond this world. And when we get down to what holds real value, it doesn't matter what existence you're in, it holds its value. So this is going to bring up a lot of things around spiritual qualities and principles and things like that as well. So looking a little bit deeper, and I think a lot of things we've been chasing, we start to realize like I'm all for having the environment protected. I'm all for taking care of things and having beautiful spaces. I love that. It's part of why I live in a very rural area. But at the same time, we can't protect every single minute little species in the world. Part of life is that there's going to be life and death, and that's a reality. And so it's kind of, in some ways an illusionary value um, to to displace all of humanity and to create suffering for all of humanity for, one to five members of a species that is not going to really affect the entire biosystem or the whole system structure in a way. Um, we have to look at things a little more realistically, and I think that's a lot of what July is bringing in. We want to watch for who is in truth and integrity, and those who are not in truth are going to be doing a lot of retaliating on things. So we're going to see that upheaval is coming from those people who are more aligned with corruption, who are not aligned with God divine service. And those who are in truth and integrity, they've got patience. They can sit and wait because they know all they have to do is sit in that space. And if they sit in that space, the truth is going to come up. The people in corruption are going to expose themselves. They don't really have to do anything but sit and wait. And when you know your value and your worth and you're standing in truth and integrity, then, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to do the big battles, so to say. So I think that that's going to be a thing, and we want to watch, who is doing the retaliating. And this gets tricky because we have a lot of different psyops and illusions and things going on. So it gets very tricky to know who really is retaliating and who isn't at times, but that will be an indicator. Now, from the 1st through the 22nd, there's going to be a casting out of those who resist temptations. So those people who can't be bought, those people who can't be paid for, those people who can't be bribed, those people are going to start being cast out. So we see these kind of waves, right? Because those people get cast out to start with. Everybody attacks them, thinking, okay, we can make them go away if we attack them. And then they come back, and all of a sudden everybody tries to be their friend, kind of like, okay, well, we'll pretend to be their friend, and then we'll use that, and we'll find their weaknesses, and then we'll tempt them with something, and we'll bait them with something, and then, and then we'll get them, And then when they don't get them, and the person doesn't take the bribes or the temptations or whatever, then they get cast out again. And so we're going to see that. And we want to, that's always a good indication to us. And I always say, don't look at what you believe or who you want to be the good guy or the bad guy. Look at what's actually playing out based on these energetic influences, because that's where you're going to start to see the truth. Okay. Who is being cast out? Who's being thrown away? But again, we have to use some discretion. Are they being cast out because they are in corruption, or are they being cast out because they're not giving in to corruption? And it can be a little bit of a tricky slope to tell what is what. And what I see is a lot of people try to justify their point of view. Whoever they want to be the good guy, they try to make them out that way. And we have so many psyops going on where the exact same narrative is being given to both sides, just changing out the players. And that is really hard. So we have to watch for those things. What we do see during this time of the first 3 weeks in the month is this divine redirection among chaos. So everything seems very chaotic. It seems like a mess. It just seems like one big hot summer mess. But in reality, we're in divine redirection. And when we're in divine redirection, moving us away from that materialism way of living and moving towards a more soulful based or spiritual based living, then sometimes we're going to go through periods that are sparse. Sometimes we're going to have periods where it doesn't seem like there's a lot happening, or it just seems like there's so much chaos we can't keep up with it, or we're feeling so restricted and deprived. And these are usually temporary things. You know, these things can feel scary to people. It's just like if you're that person who doesn't want to go along with the corruption, and so you get fired from your job or let go from your job, or your position is dismissed and alleviated. And then you're sitting there going, how do I make any money? You know, and you're in between jobs and you're wondering, I got to cut back on everything. I got to do this. I got to do that. It's the same kind of concept that we see happening on a bigger scale. So it looks scary because you don't know what's next. Everything feels unpredictable. It feels uncertain. You're in this transition. You don't know how long it's going to last, all of these things. And these are the opportunities that we need to work with the circumstances we have and say, well, what direction is this moving in? How am I being redirected? What am I being moved towards? And when we start to work with the circumstances and we start to accept the reality, like, okay, we're not going to be in this field anymore. The reality of it is, I don't mesh in that material world anymore. And that allows us to start coming into liberation. It allows us to be liberated from our circumstances. It allows us to um, be free from what's holding us back. And I think that's challenging because a lot of people, society, doesn't tend to let go of what's holding them back until they're forced into it. So this is kind of, I look at this period as sort of a divine redirection that we're in. And I think that if we can embrace that and see where it leads us, yes, it is going to look scary. And yes, there are going to be times where we're like, man, this stuff in the wrong hands is going to be really, really bad news. But at the same time, sometimes we have to move through that and go, okay, we can deal with a little instruction in restriction. We can deal with a little tightness. And I think if we keep in mind, again, if we just process the experiences that we're having, we take the time to rest, we take the time to restore, we take the time to realize this is a temporary thing. It's not going to last forever. So that for me helps me know we can get through things. Even though it's uncertain, even though I don't know how long it'll last, maybe I know it's not going to last forever. So I think keeping that in mind is important. There's a lot of waking up, there's a lot of realization that happens, and those things are all very positive. We may see a break, just a break in things, and it may appear like there's not a lot happening during this time. And that's okay because sometimes we need a little break. Everything has to complete, everything has to settle down, everything has to shift and adjust. And we need periods to do that. And so there may not be high activity periods going on during those times. And it's kind of like a regrouping. It's a um, restoring period. And sometimes you need that just to like regroup your head together, right? You have those periods when you have those challenges that come through, and it's like, okay, I got to stop and process the fact that I don't have this anymore. And now, I'm headed in this direction. And what do I want to do with that? Um, it's the same concept in there. Um, the thing is we can't just escape the things that we don't like. We're in times that we've got to face what is happening, and our world has had things going on that are not so good. And we can't just walk away and choose to disappear and not face this reality because one way or another it's going to get to us. One way or another it's going to hit us. And it's always better if we consciously face the reality of things because that's when we can deal with them. That's when we can transform them. If we try to ignore them, they're going to come back and be a bigger source of challenge and misery in our life. And we're going to be in a lot worse conditions if we don't deal with them. So, it's kind of like doing chores. You don't always like to do chores, but there's benefits in doing them. And if you just face them and get them done, then you can go have fun and play the rest of the day. It's the same sort of thing. We've got to face the reality and we can't run from it. This is also going to be a very vulnerable time, and I think people are going to feel this vulnerability again, because the unpredictability, the uncertainty of things. And that is also, though, going to bring us into some of the processing, the reflecting, and help us see the beauty of the experience that we're going through. So, again, we might be going through these huge challenges, but man, there's not a lot of generations that are living through what we're living through. I think about it a lot, and people my generation, we have some conversations every now and then about it, like, wow, do you realize we're like the last generation using a actual telephone? Do you realize, we were the last generation to have a lot of different things, and how incredible is this to see all of the technology coming in. Even if I'm not pro technology, it's still an incredible thing to see what's happening and what is coming in and to be a part of these times, even though they're not pleasant. And I think a lot of spiritual people, they came in to be a part of these big changes, and yet they're struggling with them and they're fighting them. And they're just like, it's so miserable here and it's so awful and my life is horrible and all of these things. And it's like, hey, you signed up for this. What can I say? You came here, you chose this, you're clearing stuff, whatever the case is, you're here. And you know what? Sorry, Buttercup, it is not all fairies and flowers in this dimension. And you came here to face the hard stuff because you thought you were ready to deal with the hard stuff, and now you're here. You don't want to deal with the hard stuff. Well, guess what? You're going to have to deal with it. And people don't like me saying those things. I get it. I understand it's a harsh reality to hear, but it is what it is in a sense. It's why we're here. We want to deal with these things and face these things. So I think that people will start to see in that vulnerability, in that insecurity, they'll also start to find the beauty in it. And that is a positive thing. A lot of people are going to be under stress, anxiety due to the uncertainties. And as we know, when people get stressed, they get anxious, they do stupid things. And they do things that just are really poor choices. They do things that they wouldn't normally do. And this can trigger things to happen, whether that triggers crime, whether that triggers abuse, whether that triggers other things. It can also, though, the positive side is it can lead those people in corruptions to make mistakes because the more stress and anxiety somebody is in, if they're not in truth and integrity, they're going to make mistakes. If they are in truth and integrity, they're probably going to use that stress and anxiety to strengthen themselves, and they're not worried about what comes out in things, even if they make some sort of mess up or miscommunication or something like that. They might be stressed, they might be tense, but again, this uncertainty does put people in that space, and we need to be alert to that because those people who already struggle, who already have a hard time, are going to be much more reactive than normal. And this is where we see people go off the deep end. This is where we see people just boom, and do these crazy wild acts that are not so great. And so we need to be alert to that. I always say, be alert because if you've got people around you that are on this high stress anxiety level, you know, You either need to be the person who can calm them down and pull them out of that, or you need to step away until they can calm down. Because when somebody hits those spaces, they become unpredictable. And that's where danger starts to surface. Um, During this time, we're going to see it's going to lead us to increase or see an increase in addictions and attempts to escape reality. So when I see this come up, that tells me that we're probably going to see more drug-related deaths. We're going to see more suicides coming up. We're going to see more things going wrong in connection to addiction. So again, this addictions can be anything. They can be food, they can be sex, they can be drugs, they can be vanity, they can be fame, they can be fortune, they can be all kinds of things. And this is a time where those addictions are crashing down on people. They made poor choices. They're now having to deal with the consequences of those choices, and they don't want to deal with the consequences of those choices. So what's their solution? They're going to look to escape. So that may mean more drugs or additional drugs or different drugs. And unfortunately, there's, a lot of stuff coming in. It's not like when I was growing up and pot was nothing more than a natural plant. It's all laced with all this stuff now and it's, got all these extra chemicals on it and all of these other things. And, when we start getting that, the body just can't handle those things. So again, we have to be careful because when people want to escape and they're in addictions, again, that's when they tend to do stupid things. That's when they tend to become dangerous. And that doesn't mean we need to walk around in fear and paranoia and all of that all the time. But we do need to be alert and we do need to be cautious and we need to recognize that that's the time when we see murder suicides. That's the time when we see weird things coming up because people will go out and do something and they're like, and you have these people, especially if they're attached to cults or certain religious beliefs, and you'll see them. They'll take their kids out camping and then they do something to the kids and they do something to themselves because they can't live with themselves, or they decide because they can't live, they can't do something else. Or you'll see people who are like, I can't, they feel so guilty about something. And that if they're carrying that guilt and then they're doing addictions and then they're looking to escape, again, that's when they will go and take something out and say, we've seen that. We've seen that even back in my day where it's like, I don't like that you made this choice, going to take you out. Um, these are not pleasant things to look at. These are not pleasant things to experience or hear about or any of that in there. So we just have to use conscience. And if we're feeling those needs to escape, we need to get the help that we need. And again, stop trying to escape and let's get down and deal with the issues. I know that can feel overwhelming. I know it can feel hard, but it's important. It's important as part of this transition to process those feelings and to find healthy outlets, to find ways to cope with them, to deal with them, because they're not just going to go away. And if you look at them in most religious or spiritual practice viewpoints, you're not getting out of dealing with that. That just means you have to come back in another lifetime and deal with harder circumstances and more challenging things. And, you don't ever really escape it. You create your own hell is what you create in that process. So moving on with that. So a lot of this addiction stuff coming up in the first 3 weeks. Um, a lot of people are during this time were really called to disconnect from the lies, from the illusions, from false gods, and to get connected with God and divine source. So we may see some revival stuff coming up in the news cycles, save yourself before the world ends. There's a lot of people on this, revelations kick right now. I've seen that come and go so many times in my lifetime. Um, and yes, I think ultimately, if we keep that connection, whether you go to a church or whether you're, do it as a private practice or whatever your method is, keeping that connection with God, I think is important because that is where we can start to see through things. When we start to look at things more through God's eyes, when we start to look at things in the light of spiritual values, and we choose that path, and then the lies and the deceptions become clearer and clearer. And I've seen that in my own life. The more I step into the spiritual values, the deeper I go into them, the easier it is for me to spot the lies. But when I was lost in a lot of the lies and the illusions, or, early in life, when that was a path that was being taken, um, couldn't see the lies and the illusions because I was in them. And I think that that's a tricky thing. And I see that in, again, spiritual movements a lot in the truth or movements and communities, um, where people are so lost in the lies, they believe they're true, they have all the justifications for them, everything. Um, but they're not in that God alignment. They're not in alignment with divine source. So we really want to use that opportunity. And I think there's going to be more and more things coming up calling out the lies. I think there's going to be more people moving in that direction. Again, even a lot of big influencers, a lot of people that are being followed by a lot of people I know, um, are in these, and they're going to be susceptible to being called out. And we have to disconnect from them. If you're going to progress, if you're going to move forward, you have to disconnect from the lies. It's kind of as simple as that. Um, we've got to choose and act responsible. And again, this means sometimes you have to be restrictive. It's kind of like if you're going to be responsible and, keep your bills paid, you got to show up to your job on time. And if you're going to show up to your job on time, that means getting up, even if you don't want to get up. You know, we need to choose that path right now because if we don't, we're on such a self-destructive path that we're going to end up in a really unfavorable future unless we start becoming more responsible. And that's responsible in a lot of ways. I mean, we can say, that's responsible in the choices we're making, that's responsible in what we're doing in our country, that's responsible to the earth, that's responsible to spiritual values, that's responsible to a lot of different things, and everybody has their different opinions on that. Again, most of these things rooted in lies. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle of the two ends of the spectrum. And both sides oftentimes use lies if they're on the extreme polar end, on one end or another of it. Um, but we've got to stay focused on what's responsible, and we want to look at those leaders who are doing responsible things. Maybe they don't do everything we like because we might want to have a more fun life, or not have to work and just live off the system or things like that. But at the same time, we got to be responsible, and we got to draw limits. And you take something like that, and it's like, where's the responsible piece? The responsible piece is to keep things going for the people who need to be on the system for one reason or another. And there are definitely people who need that, and they shouldn't be penalized because of life circumstances. But we also can't just put everybody on the system. You know, we we need to also uh, bring things to a point where we're not allowing people to fraud the system or take advantage of the system or things like that. So that's a way of being responsible, okay? Because when everybody's frauding the system, then you don't have it for the people who need it. And we're not here to support that corruption, because when you're supporting the people defrauding the system, you're supporting corruption. When you're doing that, you're separating from God, divine source, and that just creates all kinds of big messes in our world. And that's a lot of how we're in the challenges, and the messes that we're in is from doing that very pattern of things. Um, Evaluating our path. And we can't afford to gamble right now. So this is a time that's really tricky, because if something's really well thought out, and it has an excellent chance of paying off. Like when I say excellent chance, I mean like 90, 95, 99% chance of paying off, then it's worth taking the risk on it. But we can't gamble with resources we don't have. We can't gamble when something has like a 5% chance of paying off and it's going to take a lot of resources. And we're hoping that that 5% will work out and then it's going to save us somehow. I see a lot of people with this, for example, with the reset. They're looking for this financial reset, Jasara, Nasara, whatever, to happen. And they're banking their whole life on this and they're doing things banked on that coming through. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. I can't say 100% either way, but living your life based on that, hoping that that's going to pull you out of debt and pull you out of bad choices is not going to work. And it's going to keep blocking even the possibility of something like that happening. You have to work with what you have in hand and work from there. And people say, well, when I get this money, I can do this and I can do that and I can, well, that's all fine and dandy, but what makes you think you can't help people from where you are now? Maybe you can't do it on this some grand scale, but it doesn't mean you can't help people. And maybe something you do to start help people encourages other people to do it, and then it does become something bigger. But we can't gamble right now. And if we do, we're going to take hard falls. And the countries and the leaders and the people that gamble with resources they don't have, and I could see this happening in some of the Middle East areas or some of the European areas or things like that, they're going to see some hard falls because of that. Now, the people that are making really wise choices and say, hey, I appreciate this, but I got to take care of my country and I got to protect my resources and, we're not going to invest in that, then they're going to see some probably pretty good windfalls coming through or good successes coming through. So really kind of looking at that, who is sitting in that space? Who's gambling? Who's taking the wise risk? And again, this can lead to some stagnation, right? As they are just trying to evaluate what's the best path forward. And that's a smart and wise thing to do. We got to stop and look at it and say, well, what have we tried in the past? Where are we at now? What is the path forward that is going to be a favorable path to take? And sometimes you have to take a pause so that you can stop and look at everything and see what is going on. Speculation, like I said, using resources you don't have, working based on what you think you should have coming in, not going to work. It's going to backfire, and you can even block those resources from coming through. So, speculation is going to be a big thing, and the countries that work in speculation are going to have some really big issues. The leaders that take that path going to have some really big issues going on. And I think we're going to see this in some of the corrupt countries because in the corrupt countries, what do? They're always speculating on their funders, on the people to provide them the resources to do something. And, you know, they're going to get themselves in trouble because eventually those corrupt resources are going to dry up and they're not going to be there and the funds aren't going to be there. And it's going to get ugly when it happens. And they're going to be in a lot worse position than if they just face the reality and deal with things from a more reasonable and practical space. Um, Again, we got to handle what's got to be done. We can't procrastinate on things. Yes, we want to take the time to make wise decisions, but when we know the path forward, we can't procrastinate. We don't want to just put things off unnecessarily. We've got to meet what needs to be done, and right now there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Now, as we move into the last week and a half of the month, the 23rd through the end of the month, we've got what we call maternal energy rising. And, for the spiritual communities, we'll probably see a big push in the goddess energy coming out at that time. This is a time when this energy rises. On one hand, it can be very favorable for us. But on another hand, that's also when we see things like the feminist movement come out, the Me Too movement come out. We could probably see stuff around, I don't know, abortion issue stuff coming up again. Um, this is when you start seeing these feminists come out all about women power. Well, you know what? It's just like anything else. We all have the same rights. And yes, we should stand up if actual discrimination is happening, but no race or class or sex or anything else should have more rights than another person. And, that's a tricky place to be. So I think we're going to see some of that coming out. But I think also, what this is, we're going to see more mothers speaking out about things. So if mothers have had, for example, kids with injuries from shots, from back in the COVID area or anything like that, we may see more mothers speaking out on autism or what's happening in the school system. So wherever mothers are impacted, which means things around our children, our education system, women's rights, these are all going to be things in it. Now, likewise, if we look at it from more the religious aspect or the religious groups, we can see even more movements coming out celebrating being motherhood. We could see bills or things passed for, supporting, more things coming out, supporting families, supporting births, supporting women in general in different ways. And so anything that connects to that mother role, and the mother role is connected to pure abundance. So that pure abundance, again, it's not just about money and resources, because that's really in many ways more of a masculine energy. But it's really about knowing that there's always enough, right? The mother always has the comfort, always has the nourishment. No matter what she has, she's always willing to share a little bit. That pure abundance energy is about the caring. So it's the balancing piece to the materialism, to the progression, to the forward movement that we see happening. And that is meaning, okay, yeah, we have to move forward, but we have to care for people. But we don't have to let them be unnecessary dependents. We can, they can put in some effort to earn what they're getting or different things like that. There's always options, but I think anything that connects to mothers, uh, we could see rising and surfacing during that last week and a half. And this is a time where there's a lot of need for love, highlighting uh, absence could be going on, how the absence of the mother at home has um, impacted the family unit, just as the absence of a father figure has impacted it. So we could see again more movements coming back to a family unit as opposed to, marrying for life, being more selective in partners, things like that. And I think the benefit side of this is that a lot of movements out there, whether it's been spiritual movements or other things, have, uh, you know, seen the woman staying at home as a subservient position. Um, but when you get into a lot of the actual true religious things, it wasn't about suppression of women. It was actually about creating a stronger life for the family. And it was actually a very revered role in the family unit. And it was a privilege. And it was, in some ways, even a sign of wealth that the woman wouldn't have to work and do things. And we've been told all kinds of distortions and lies, especially as women, around that. Oh, well, you have a right to work. And of course, we have a right to work. If somebody wants to go work, if you're a woman, you want to go work, go do your thing. You want to be an entrepreneur, all power to you. But that doesn't mean those who choose to stay at home and raise a family are less than or diminishing their womanhood or any of that. Each role has a blessing and people have to follow what is best for them and their role. But there is a huge beauty and blessing in embracing that feminine role. But it's part of the big distortions of getting us to not appreciate the body that we were born into. And I think that that's a big thing. So this comes out now more on this bigger global level. We might see some arguments or protest or whatever else up around this. But again, we want to get back to that pure abundance, which is that mothering energy, which really connects to, again, our abundance, our success, our creating of things, the caring about things, caring about life. And I think that that's going to be important, and that will connect in with environmental issues, animal rights issues, human right issues. And I think this actually can help nourish some very favorable programs. And I know a lot of people who are on that side of things. They have fallen into a lot of lies and distortions, and we have an opportunity to transform it, because yes, it is definitely important to, again, protect the animals, protect the environment. But a lot of the organizations, ironically, that they've been supporting have been doing exactly the opposite of that, even though they say they're doing good things. And so I think this is going to be a positive option that we could see come up. A need for more love, again, highlighting the absence. Nothing tears a mother apart like two children fighting. And I think that that's a bigger global dynamic right now. Our spiritual mother, whether you see that through religion or spirituality, is crying. It's crying over our arguments, over our sibling rivalry that we have going on in this world. And that's what it is. We're children fighting with each other in these battles and in these arguments. And it is really actually tearing that feminine energy apart instead of helping it. And we need to think very, very carefully about that. And this is a call to unite. This is a call to stop the sibling rivalry and realize we each have different wisdom, different skills, different things to appreciate, and to learn to start getting along. And that seems to be so hard today. And it's also going to be an area of division. And I think that that could be one of the things we have to watch for, is these attempts to divide men and women and to get them pitted against each other. And women against women, big division of that. And we see this involved in a lot of the trans movement. And that's nothing against people who make that choice, but it is that movement which is outside of a lot of other things. Um, Whether you agree with that or not, gay, whatever, that movement is about tearing women apart. And I hope that more women will recognize that and see that. And that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to look at. And our struggles are really connected to a lack of true caring. So coming back into this caring, but a lot of people think that these hard things that we need to do, the responsibilities and the obligations we have, is uncaring, and that's not necessarily true. So again, coming back into that reality. And these struggles, when we talk about the struggles connected to a lack of true caring, that comes back into what I was just saying about fraud, money laundering, and hurting those most in need. A lot of these green policies actually hurt our animals and our wildlife. If you stop, carbon and that being put into the air, guess what? You're going to lose your trees. You're going to lose your forests. You're going to lose your habitats. You're going to lose all of these things. You're going to destroy a lot of these things. You know, uh, AI is going to do far more damage, probably. I see it. They put these towers in over in the forest that I walk in, and the trees are dying over there. And they're not dying because of carbon dioxide. You know, they're not dying because of that. Um, it hasn't changed, a lot from that aspect. So it's we have to look at these things, and we need to realize that, again, we're told, we're programmed that, well, we gotta have these big programs, and we gotta have all this support for them. Yeah, of course we need the support for the people in need, but if we truly care about the people who are truly in need, then we will want to support getting the fraud and the corruption and the money laundering out of the system. Because a lot of these organizations that are set up as so-called humanitarian organizations are money laundering schemes. When you look really deep into them, they're money laundering schemes. And, a lot of these, well, Act Blue. Act Blue is one of those platforms that is used for payments to go to different charities. And that is full of money laundering when you get into it. So, uh, we got to watch these things. We just really, really got to watch them. And we got to realize that if we do care and we do want to help the people in need, we got to get this stuff out of the system. And that is part of the components of it. It's just like if you're a mom and your children need something and somebody is coming in and they don't need something and they take what your child needs, well, wouldn't you stand up for your child? That's where we're at. You got a lot of people taking things that they don't need, that they don't have a right to. It's kind of that simple. A lot of deep reflection time, love, compassion. And so this is interesting. Again, we may not see as much action happening because of that, because again, it's this processing, this reflective aspect. And, how can we do things in compassionate ways? And when you talk about having to stand strong against another country or hold boundaries and certain things, it doesn't always feel like compassion. But as we know, and when you do the real compassion work and the unconditional love work, sometimes you have to say no because that is the love. The no is the love instead of the yes, instead of just bending over and giving everything to whoever wants it. Um, and sometimes, when your child's going down a bad path, you have to say no to them. Same kind of concept. The actions that are going to be taken, we really want to pay attention in this last week and a half because they're going to be remembered. They're not going to be let go of very easily for better or worse. They're going to stick around. They're going to be the things that memes are made out of. They're going to be the things that people are going to be remembered by. So we really want to pay attention. Who's making some good decisions? Who's not making good decisions? How compassionately are they acting in those things? We've got to find a balance between this heaven and this earth component if we're going to have a successful future. It's not one or the other. We have to have a balance of these components here in this existence that we're in. And we do need to act from the soul self. In other words, uh, as we grow, we've got to have conscious growth. We've got to have compassionate growth. And again, sometimes that means tough things. Sometimes that means facing things we don't like. Sometimes that means giving up addictions and pleasures in order to have what we actually need in there. So finding that balance is very important. Strengthening people, giving them command over their own lives. So we could see some policies rolling out during this time, which do strengthen people, which put more power into their hands, that maybe remove some restrictions that they have. I always think about these aspects of where we've had components where people are used to do a lot of trade and a lot of barter, and then they started coming down on the trade and the barter, like, well, you got to report your trade and your barter, and we're going to tax you for that trade and that barter. So even though you're not taking money, we're taking in money and earning money. We're going to take money from you. That's how screwed up the tax system is on those things. So hopefully we will see more that comes back to, hey, if you want to barter and do things, that's your business. There's no income, so you can't tax on an income that you're not making. I think we might see things like that. Like that would fit in with compassion, and that would fit in with giving people more command over their life, giving them more options. And again, yes, of course, we need to keep certain things in check, but we can keep things in check and remove restrictions. You've got a lot of farmers, for example, out there. I know in my area, there's a lot of great people who are using no pesticides, no chemicals, using regenerative farming techniques and things like that. But they can't get the certification for organic farming because of all the hoops and the boundaries and the cost and everything else they have to go through to get that certification. And it's absurd, you know. So I just ask people now, I don't trust it. And even the certifications, you've got organic farmers who can get an organic certification, but they're using pesticides or or chemicals or things that are worse than the standard pesticides out there. So you have to be really, looking at some of these things, and a lot of these things that were put in as restrictions um, were again about control. They weren't about, they were about controlling people and about having choke points where they could cut people off and suffocate them and destroy their business if they wanted to. And so I think we're going to see more opening up, more things coming back into the people's hands, more opportunities for people. And again, we could see that play out through removing restrictions. We could see that by removing taxes, lowering costs, or different things like that. So I think we're going to see more of these cutting of restrictions coming through during this time. We do have unexpected upheaval and sudden changes of plans. So that's another piece in how somebody deals with that. Again, do they deal with it compassionately? Do they deal with it wisely? Do they deal with it calmly? How do they deal with it? They're going to be remembered very strongly for how they do it, which tells me there's going to be some wrenches thrown into the system. Things may look like, okay, we're moving all along, but I think this is the time where there could be a few wrenches thrown into the plans that are in motion, and that's going to create some challenges. I also see storms and weather issues coming up, and I think our really bad storms that come up during this time probably have a manipulation piece. And when I talk about storms, it's not just storms like some rain or, if you're in the southern hemisphere, maybe snow or something, but it's not just weather related stuff. I mean, this can be tsunamis, this can be earthquakes, this can be any natural disaster, volcanic eruptions. We know a lot of things can be triggered through sound, through energy, through laser aspects, through all kinds of things. And so I think weather manipulation will be at play in this last week and a half. And when we see this, you want to be very careful. So that means if they say the storm's coming in 4 hours, you want to be home within an hour or two. You don't want to take any chances. Keep some supplies on hands to get you through in case the power goes out for a couple of days or something like that. Um, it can be rough on people. And this is a time where the mind is not necessarily very clear. So, yeah, things may not make sense because people might be working more by intuition than they are working from a logical path, especially if the logical path has interference or uprooting or disruptions to it, or the plans get changed. Sometimes you got to work intuitively. So listening to that intuition, who can really work on that intuitive level? And that's always an interesting piece to me with world leaders, because some of them are really good at it and some of them are just horrible instinctually. And there are some that when they're working by their instincts, it just sends everybody in an uproar because they do things so non-traditionally and off the wall and out of the box that it really throws people. Now, our actions, when we look at the actions that we can see coming up during this time, I do see a lot of conflicts and power battles coming in this month. And again, that's where you get the manipulated weather because that is part of the battle techniques that can be used in there. This is a big time that's exposing who are the dictators, who are the leaders, so to say. And the dictators during this time, during this month, we're going to see them taking action that will actually hurt civilians. And that's not going to be a good thing. And that's going to be a big identifying factor with them, and they're going to be hurting civilians, particularly who do not comply with what they want or who won't give up their rights. So, I always keep my eyes on those who are run by socialists, by Marxists, by communist rule. And that takes us into a lot of different countries. That means there's probably going to be some stuff coming up in Canada, possibly. There could be stuff coming up in a place like China. There could be stuff coming up And well, some of your third world countries, your Middle Eastern countries, you could see attacks on women that would play in with that maternal energy, women who start to speak up and then they are taken out by the corruption. So we could see killings that way. Um, yeah, it can get ugly in some places. But again, real leaders, they work totally differently. And real leaders are working to empower their people, how to make them stronger. We're going to see more falls from power, more transitions of power going on during this time. So always something to keep an eye on. But we can't bend to the pressure. And I think that's the big thing. I think that that's one of the advantages somebody like Trump has is he doesn't bend to the pressure. He sits back and he's like, I know the value we have. I know what our country has to offer. I know how much, everybody else has to depend on us, and we don't really have to depend on other people as a country here. And so he doesn't tend to bend to a lot of that pressure, and that's a good thing in times like these. Whether you like him or not, it's a good thing in these kind of times because he keeps that cool and he can work in those intuitive flows. But I get it that a lot of people don't like him, and I hear it on every side, pros and cons there, but it is important that we don't bend to that pressure because it is that pressure that put us under a lot of this corruption to start with. And we just can't afford to bend to it anymore. And of course, the pressure is going to come on. The more the corruption loses its hold, the more the pressure comes on. And it's important that decisions are not set aside or delayed. And this is a tricky thing towards the end of the month when the mind isn't as clear, because on one hand, you don't want to be making all kinds of decisions during that point. So hopefully those decisions, the things that can't be delayed, the people making them will have an out that they can use. They will be very good intuitively and listen to that intuition, um, or they will make them earlier in the month when the mind is still clear. That's my hope in these things. Again, storms are going to hit hard and they're going to hit in unexpected ways. And this is probably going to be a time where disaster relief is going to be needed. Again, a lot of action around weather manipulation happening. And so just don't take chances out there. It's going to be what it's going to be. This is part of the technology that we work under these days. So pay attention, stay alert, keep supplies on hand. It doesn't hurt to have extra supplies on hand. They could always be used up, or if you don't use them in a certain point and we get past the storm challenges, you can always donate them to your local food shelter. You can always give them to somebody in need. There's so many options that you can do if you've got a little extra on hand. It'll help you back up a neighbor in need when times come. It's better to have it and think about things that can endure, various storms that are not necessarily perishable food. More of your dry store good foods and things like that. That you have a variety of ways if power is out or things are down that you have a way to eat or cook them. And that's, you don't want to live on that all the time, but it helps in emergencies and disaster situations, making sure you've got plenty of water on hand or accessibility to water. Okay, thoughts, the mindset, where is that going to be? How to do what needs to get done. I think that's what people are thinking about. Here's what we got to get done. How do we do that? And what are the consequences for being lazy and entitled? And accountability is a big thing. Where do we want to hold accountability? How do we hold accountability? This is a time where people are we're going to see more of that accountability coming out. Here in the States, of course, we had our DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, as she was leaving, she did a whole huge thing of exposing Fauci, his connection to the biolabs, um, gain of function researcher, I should say, and those connections into Wuhan and into COVID and different things like that. And so that opens a whole door for accountability to come into place, for new charges to be brought up that he wasn't exempt from. So I think there's a lot of different components from that aspect. And there's going to be a lot of thinking about, and this is from the 1st through the 24th, so a good portion of the month. Um, what needs to be done and how do we do it? What's a ethical, legal, appropriate way to handle these things that need to be taken care of? So it's all coming, it's all happening. We see a lot of past resurfaces again, so you have things like Fauci's charges just coming back around again, Obama's Peace Prize coming into question. Some of these things I think are going to be used as distractions. Some of them are going to be used to trigger division in people, get people arguing, fighting, disagreeing. Some of these things are going to be connected to old grudges that are being held. So I think there can be a lot of connections. And then, of course, some of them are where people weren't held accountable when they were happening, and now the accountability is coming up. So the past resurfacing can happen in a lot of ways. And again, it's going to be looking at, well, what do we need to do? It's beyond just one individual person or holding one person accountable. What do we need in the future? Well, in the future, you need a court system that's going to hold that accountability, who's going to rule lawfully and by the constitutions or the country's um, regulations and policies and rights and uphold things that are legal, uphold what needs to be upheld. It also goes beyond that. It's not just, again, one person because there's a whole network of people involved in this stuff. So it's not just about, what Fauci did, but the whole gain of function aspect, the whole how do you shut down that whole bigger corruption? It's not just about whether Obama deserved a Peace Prize or not. It is about what peace prizes are actually given out to and that whole corrupt network of things in there. And so it goes much deeper. And I think this is where people have frustration sometimes because they just look for the accountability and they're not realizing it's not just about one person. It's a whole bigger thing that has to be addressed. We're not just treating the symptom. We're not just treating the little boo-boo scratch on the arm that we got or the bite we got. We have to go in and treat the whole hornet's nest, as the saying goes. You have to go in and, fix the wire that you tripped over that caused the scratch in the first place. That's the pieces we're dealing with. Um, I do suggest during this month, or during at least most of the month, that people don't think about going into protest. A lot of people will be thinking about creating protests, having protests, being in these large crowds. And of course, here in the States, 4th of July, 250th birthday of our country. And that's going to be a huge celebration in a lot of places. So I really encourage people to be careful because these are going to turn into some very hot, dangerous situations where they're going to be very prone to having accidents happen. There's going to be a lot of inversions. There's going to be a lot of aggravation stirred up. We can definitely see agitators in the crowd. We could see Antifa action in this crowd being activated in these crowded situations. Um, there are going to be probably a lot of things, and I'm always split when I think of something like 4th of July because it's kind of like, on one hand, it's a prime target because of the large crowds. On another hand, it's almost too obvious of a date to do it. And, will they really do it on that date? Because there's going to be so much more enforcement out and, militia or military or police force or whatever in those areas watching over it. So maybe it's not the time to do it. But we do have violent energy active during this time and people thinking about violence and people having that in their mind and people wanting fairness and justice and seeking that. And again, if they're holding these grudges and things as well, that can really trigger people. And we could see the attempts to it. So we have to make sure if you are in those crowds to stay very, very alert, stay extra cautious. Don't get sucked into the battles. Don't let people agitate you or provoke you with things. Don't go down those roads. And this may be one of those years you may want to sit on the outside of something. So instead of being for example, right where the fireworks are happening, maybe you want to sit a couple of blocks away on a hill where you can see them, and not be in the heart of it. That might be the difference of things. So these things can turn deadly. Accidents can turn deadly during this time. Thoughts can turn deadly. Thoughts can be meant to scare people. They may just be thinking, well, we're just going to scare people. And then it all goes wrong. So I don't really suggest being in the heart of these big crowds during this time. I know we're going to have big celebrations going on, but maybe you can find the balance in them. Maybe you can find a balance there. Just don't take anything for granted. That's going to be a huge thing, and stay very alert. I think this is going to be a very unfavorable time for whistleblowers. I think we'll have them speaking up, but I think we're going to see more things happening to whistleblowers during this time, unfortunately. Um, people who have things to hide don't like people talking. That's the bottom line. And the key is to transmute things, transmute our past and move in a favorable direction. Okay. It's just like here we are in, June. We just passed Juneteenth and all of these things. And we can sit there and argue, about slavery things. We can argue about all these different hot issues about things, but you've got bigger slavery that happened to the Irish than you had to the Africans. And you've got all of these different components there. Now, we can sit around arguing about this to the end of our lives, or we can say, how do we create a favorable path forward? And that's the real solution. How do we transmute this? Instead of being at battle with each other, shouldn't we be unifying? Shouldn't we be coming together? Shouldn't we be focused on peace with each other? Well, you're not going to get peace when you're creating separation and division and hate and accusing people of things and holding on to grudges and judgments and all of this stuff and buying into all these reparation things. This is, I'm sorry, but it's all BS. And now is the time we need to transmute it. Now is the time we need to just say, it doesn't matter what your skin color it is. It doesn't matter what your sex is. It doesn't matter about these things. What matters is how are we going to care about people? How are we going to create a strong world to live in? How are we going to um, move forward in a way that is favorable and positive and hopefully aligned with God, divine source? Now, as we move into the last week of the month, the 25th, the mindset shifts to completing things. We need to finish up what's started. So we may not see as much happening at the end of the month because it's more about wrapping up things that are already in motion. It's easier to see what is needed during this time, which is ironic because that's also when our mind isn't as clear. But because our mind is creative, we can actually see some things maybe that we haven't been looking at, or we might get some revelations about things or messages or signs that help us see more about what's needed. And this is a time period that's really, the thought pattern is going to be more about how do we transform things, preparing for the transformation. What do we need to do to set what needs to be taken care of and put into place so that transformation can happen? Because again, you can't just do things. You've got to have things set into place to handle it and make sure that the transformation can happen. And this is about entering these new cycles and chapters and preparing for that. So I think we will see a lot that's happening. Maybe we'll get news about things that are going to be coming up that will be happening in the world. This is a big time for supporting humane ventures. And again, we have to look at what's truly humane versus just the illusions and the programming of what we've been told is that. Um, Growth involving, we need a path that nourishes divine presence. Growth and evolvement need to happen. That's part of life. It's part of humanity. It's part of human nature. And that's a good thing. It's good to engage our creative energy, but we do want to hold it in that alignment with divine presence. It needs to nourish divine presence instead of nourishing the hatred and the division and the anger and all of these other things. So when we're looking at it, how do we make this growth and this evolvement? And I always come back to look at yourself, look at your own life. What can you support? How can you support people being positive? How can you can choose not to be in battles with people. It's one thing to express opinions and to have a little challenge in there to open your mind up, but it's a whole nother thing to just sit there and be arguing and arguing and arguing and being in this constant battle. And I think that we definitely can move forward in favorable directions, but we do have to be nourishing divine presence if we're going to do it. Because without it, it might feel good initially for a very short period of time, just like an addiction, and then it is going to be total hell, maybe literal hell in many ways. In there, a world without divine presence is hell. Um, so, however you want to look at that, you can look at it, whether you take that metaphorically or whether you take that literally based on your beliefs. And we're creating that. We have the choice to create it, and it starts with our own choices in our own life. So choose to nourish positive things. Choose to nourish divine presence. If you do that, other people will do it too, and you know, and it will grow. And choose to support those things. The growth and the evolvement. Okay, if we're going to grow and we're going to evolve and we're going to bring certain things into our world, then how do we hold that in divine presence? Some things I think we can, some things I don't think we can but we'll find out. Um, we may also see a pulling out of things and an ending of contracts going on. So we're going to see this looking at obligations, responsibilities. We saw this where the U.S. has pulled out of things like the UN and the WHO and things like that. We might see more countries pulling out of the WHO and ending their agreements and realizing, hey, yeah, we don't want the WHO telling us everything that we can do. And taking a closer look at those things and realizing, yeah, we're not going to make a commitment to these things. And I think we're going to see more of that happening going on. We're going to see more taking a look at things like, even here in the US, we may hear more coming out about, are we actually responsible for the debt that we're carrying? If our debt was created through illegal means, if it was created through corruption, if it was created through crimes of humanity, if it was created by money laundering into unauthorized things, we may not actually be responsible for that debt. We may not actually have the debt that it says we have on paper. These are interesting things that I think could really come up. And I think that this is, it's going to be interesting to see what contracts end and what happens. And I think it's going to be very eye-opening, and a lot more of people looking at what they're obligated to, what they're responsible for, because, these networks can be positive, right? It can be very positive to have something where countries will back each other up when needed. On the other hand, some of those commitments and obligations, right, can drag you into wars or things you don't want to be in. So I think there's going to be a lot of weighing out of those things. And then we get into the soul's energy, and I always like to address this because this deals with our hope, our optimism, and how things that are happening in the world influence that hope and that optimism. So with the soul self, energy from the 1st through the 9th, so almost the first week and a half, we've got danger that we have to face, very intense choices that are going to be made, looking a lot about, are we going to drop ourselves into fate or the hands of fate or the hands of destiny? And we have to face things, whether we like them or not. We have to push and get the breakthroughs. We have to hang in there. These are life-changing choices. These are transformative choices we're going to be seeing made in the world by political leaders, by world leaders, by people in positions of authority and wealth. And if they're choosing things wisely, if they're like, hey, you can come forward with us or you can fall off into the background, whatever your choice is, that's your choice. But we're moving forward in things, and we have to do those breakthroughs. When we break through, we can move more into destiny. We're resting more into God's will with things. We're resting more into divine alignment with things. But when we're sitting there trying to force our own choices, when we're sitting there digging our heels in saying, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to do, and we're not facing the danger that we're in, and we're just going to sit back and go, I don't want to deal with it, and the countries that do that, they're going to fall into the hands of fate, and they're going to end up in much harder, much worse circumstances. The countries that sit back and go, well, I'm going to do what I want to do regardless, and I want to have this money, or I want to have this war, or I want to have that. Well, they're creating a fate that's not going to be good because they haven't learned their lessons. They haven't learned to nourish divine presence. They haven't learned to do things that are favorable for humanity. And when they do that, they're going to have to go through harder things to learn those lessons to get them to turn around. And it just gets harder and harder and harder until things are dealt with and they are faced. A lot of endings, literal and proverbial death going on. So a lot of people may be doing these spiritual rebirths during this time. We're going to see a lot of shifting happening. We may see people changing course. We may see people redirecting. We've also got a rise in paranormal activity that comes along with this influence. And I could see where that might stir up the UFO community a bit and the paranormal activity coming in and people, we have things that happen with geomagnetic shifts in the earth and different things that can cause things to happen and their natural aspects. We also could have energies at play doing different things. And, I think it's going to stir up a lot of probably people in both UFO and religious communities would be my guess in this. And you're going to have the whole doom and gloomers that's like, oh, the revelation's upon us. And, you know, it's the second coming of Christ. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard, Christ is here, or, the world is ending now, or, we'll probably have a variety of things happening around that. In that influence. So, uh, probably, we just have to be careful. Just take it with a grain of salt, don't be pressured or in a rush to jump on these narratives because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of narratives put out there in these different communities. Again, breakthroughs, success, victory is the possibility. That is the option that we have at hand if we want to take advantage of it. But anytime you're in these intense periods and major transformation and transmuting, unfavorable things to a favorable direction, there's danger involved and accidents can happen and there can be casualties that happen in that process. But we have to push through. We have to push through them. We're seeing more of a collapse in materialism, which means we could see more funding being removed or blocked to these corruption networks, collapsing in materialism, more people just not being willing to support it, especially where there is fragmentation. And I think, again, we're going to see this attempt to fragment. The corruption is going to attempt to fragment. And when people are fragmented, it's easier to get into their head. It's easier to put them in fear. It's easier to change their how they think about things. So you want to be very careful about that. Another reason why we want to, listen to people, be open to different things and different opinions on things and different viewpoints on things. But, at the same time, not necessarily be persuaded uh, unless there's some truth there, unless there's something there worth looking at. But we definitely don't want to be in this fragmentation and this division. Um, we can't help each other, and we don't help humanity when we're in that place. Misfortune happens when we try to bargain with God or divine source. I'll tell you, I've watched some people do this. God, if you just give me another year, God, if you just do this for me, God, if you just give me this material pleasure, I'll do this. We hear it all the time from people, but that's not going to play out well. You can't bargain with God. God's not just going to wipe everything out necessarily. Where we try to force our human desires and the way we want things to be, we're going to run into trouble. And spiritual values are required. I mean, that's the bottom line. Again, when you step into spiritual values, it's just not always an easy path. Matter of fact, it takes a lot of strength to be on there. And when you're in a position of a world leader, it's critical to have people that uphold some spiritual values. I mean, they all have their probably psychopathic tendencies because they wouldn't be in those positions without them. But uh, at the same time, you got to have some kind of values in there. And that's so, so very important. And it makes a big, big difference. In what goes down. And we can kind of look at that. Who's experiencing misfortune? Who's not experiencing misfortune? Trying to do these bargains? You know, God may forgive, God may bless your sins or whatever, but you're not going to get out of the consequences no matter what you do in it. So we've got to be careful, and there are definitely people out there that are doing a lot of bargaining, and that is where going to be some of the turbulence and the upheaval comes, and this is going to be a hard lesson, I think, for people in the world. I think also these false preachers, these preachers who are backing narratives, these people, preachers and religions and churches and spiritual communities that are all jumping on these political bandwagons. I think there are a lot of the ones that are bargaining, trying to bargain with God, because they're all praying for their own victory instead of praying for um, humanity, instead of praying for God's will and things. And that's going to blow up on these communities. And that's, you know, hard lessons. Like I say, hard lessons. We've got to watch out for the preaching of false prophets because they will be active during this first week and a half. And there's going to be a lot of fear used um, to try to convince people, to persuade people, images used, making people inferior, making people believe that they're cursed, that, they're heading. So we've got to watch out for the false prophets because they're going to be very, very active during this time. And, these false prophets are always involved in these agendas. These are the preachers that are, heavily fighting for political agendas, for example. They're not neutral. God is not politically involved. I hate to tell you that if that was your thought on God, but God's not politically involved. God is, on God's schedule, time, whatever, God's path. And God's path doesn't pick one political side or another. So when you see the preachers coming out like that, it's just really showing that these are not true spiritual people, true preachers. Um, our experiences that we're having are teaching us a lot. They're getting us to dig into our soul. They're getting us to look deeper about what actually is needed in our world. And again, that can be hard because sometimes that's not the fairy flowery way of things. And this is a big thing. We've got to learn from these experiences that we're having. They're powerful experiences, but if we don't learn from them, we're not going to be able to make the shifts and the changes and transmute things to move in a favorable direction. So we've really, really got to embrace those pieces. Then from the 10th through the end of the month, so a good portion of it, we're going to see victim patterns brought up. People in positions of power and authority, of control, who want to keep that, but are not in good spa good spaces or supporting good things. These are the people that are looking to vie for bigger positions of power, are going to be trying to prove themselves by victimizing people, creating a lot of chaos, creating a lot of psyops, confusion, censorship. All of that is designed to break people's spirits. It's all about getting them to comply to things. So we have to be very careful because these psyops, again, they can be used to divide people, they can be used to create disruption, they can be used to create distractions. But the bigger things are oftentimes they're connected to removing rights. So, in other words, you're going to do what we don't like. Well, guess what? We're just going to put more restrictions on you and remove more rights, and then you'll be forced into it, and you won't have a choice, or you'll starve to death, or you'll this or that, or, so we have to. This is that enforcing. The corruption is going to become more enforceful, more restrictive, more coming down. And this is the very thing that could cause countries to pull out of agreements, is this intensifying of restrictions and control and power and victimizing that could lead countries to say, "Hey, I'm ending my agreement. I'm out. I'm not going to be involved in this." Um, and there's a lot of hidden danger, and I think this also adds to the stress and the anxiety that I talked about before, this hidden danger. People sense it. They intuitively sense we're in a dangerous position, and that leaves the spirit unsettled and unrested. It's a time where we're in kind of a spiritual battle. We have to stand up to the bullies, but we also have to know what we can influence and what we can't influence. And sometimes the best way to remove power from a bully is to walk away. Not that you're giving up on what is right or standing up to them, but sometimes the way to stand up is to walk away, because when you walk away, you may remove their power. So that's always an option to consider. And part of standing up to them can be a process of defunding, just as I talked about materialism collapsing, in the first part of the month. That can be part of removing their power in there. And corruption is going to make some big power plays. They're not going to be happy when you remove their resources and their financing, and you don't allow them to get away with things, and they have to be accountable to things. They're not just going to go, "Oh, okay, I give up, let me surrender, and I'm going to go float away and, skip off into the distance." That doesn't happen with corruption, unfortunately. That would make things very easy if that was the case, but it's not the case. And they're going to make some big power plays, and they're going to try to mobilize people. So this kind of spiritual battle, and I think again they'll use the false prophets and things as um, ways to convince people, because they see people moving towards God, towards spirituality and things like that. So they shift and they change to use those communities to try to influence people. I think we could see some attacks um, on those that have a spiritual foundation, or there could be behind the attacks some sort of spiritual foundation or meaning, like when you get in the jihadist communities, um, and you get into some of that, to them, it's a spiritual cleaning to attack, and that's the spiritual foundation or meaning behind the killings that they do. Um, but the attacks are beyond that, because the attacks really are about attacks to God, to divine source, and about money and making people in a disadvantaged position. So they might even just carry the image or the illusion that there's a spiritual connection, but might not actually be that. And again, we could see more things coming out around occult activity, but because occult activities also will do sacrifices of different kinds to not all groups, but some groups out there that are connected to spiritual meaning for their group out there. So I think there can be more attacks on that. Again, this attack on spirituality, because if the attacks are made on God, that's where people start to lose their hope. If they can't, if there's restrictions put on people, for example, on praying, or on churches, or attempts to close down churches, and people can't have that communion or that fellowship or that connection, and they're not strong on their own, um, their spirit breaks and they start to separate. And then when they separate again, they become controllable, manipulated. You go down all kinds of challenging paths. And most of these attempts, though, on the good side, will probably be blocked. They'll probably fail because they're not in divine alignment, because they are based in greed, because they are working against humanity, because they are creating suffering for those who can't defend themselves or can't protect themselves or can't do things, the truly disadvantaged. And I think that that's going to be part of that truth being exposed and things backfiring. Um, on people. So that is the positive side. They may make a lot of attempts, but those attempts either will backfire on them or get exposing them or something like that. And in some sense, that is that attempt to pull people away from God and break their faith and their hope, but ends up giving them hope when they can't succeed at it. So, it's good in that way. The attacks again are also about recognition, people wanting to work their way up the ranks to become the new big leaders and things. And we see that, even in Maine. I mean, we have this guy that's got a Nazi tattoo that's trying to get a position here, a prominent position in the state. And he's being backed by some pretty big funders and that are not in the state, which I don't think is totally legal, but um, anyways, that besides, he's trying to get recognition. He's trying to work his way up the ranks, basically, is what it is. These are like initiation processes, and it's just like gang activities where they go out and rape somebody, or they kill somebody, or they do something to work their way up the ranks of the rank, their position in the gang. And it's a very similar thing. And we're seeing this on the political arena. So some of these people that are doing these things and making the attacks, it is about gaining some sort of recognition and standing, um, proving themselves in some ways. And then partnerships and alliances are going to be seen and they're going to be tested. And boy, Trump has done this in the past. He's done it. He's done it with some of the stuff around Iran and testing countries to see if they're actually with him or not with him, who showed up when he needed it, who showed up, after the fact, so to say. And so this testing of partnerships. And that's going to be interesting because that's going to expose some more people in that process. And that process is maybe going to give some hope. It might break down some hope because he also has that ability to partner with people that a lot of us cringe over and go, seriously? That's who you're going to partner with? Um, I just kind of watch it play out because I see, I guess, some deeper layers and things, but at the same time, we have to watch those things. And this is a time where people might switch their alliances. Again, if people see how some of these things are going to play out, like in the WHO, the Paris Climate Agreement, things like that, um, and they start to pull out of that, and they may say, hey, can we come join your alliance over here? That is actually trying to uphold peace, that actually is trying to take care of people in the world versus what we've been under. You can see, people switching political parties during this time, all kinds of that going on. And, the real question is who's carrying the alliance with God or divine source? I mean, I don't care what political party you claim yourself to be under, because that doesn't really matter. What matters is what you're actually doing. What matters is, are you trying to do something favorable for humanity? Are you working in alliance with God or are you working against God? And I think ultimately that really tells us whether we should be concerned about a partnership or alliance or not. And again, there are going to be those who claim it, and they're not necessarily going to be having that. But, that's all something we have to watch out for. So, with that, I'm going to close out today, and I hope that helps you stay on top of July. Um, yeah, if you don't mind liking, sharing the video, leave a comment if you want to. Go over to the website, Compassion Codes, check it out again. I'll have 2027 coming out soon, but this is what 2026 looks like. And I appreciate all the support. As you can see, we're a very small channel here, and I hope this helps because I find that when I know these things, it helps me to go, okay, I want to avoid any of the sections around me that are going to have these protests, or that's a day I think I'll just stay inside and I'll do my shopping on another day or things like that. These heads up help me to not be caught off guard, and it helps me to stay out of the drama. And that's kind of the hope I have for you too, that it helps you stay out of some of the drama and upheaval and those sorts of things, so that you can maneuver things and not get wrapped up in all of that and stay on target and recognize maybe some of the pieces that are behind what's happening and make the experiences that we're going through in the world become beneficial for you and helpful for you. Take care, everybody, and I will see you next month.